Imagine being completely alone, miles from anyone, when you suddenly realize the sound you've been hearing isn't your own footsteps. It stops when you stop. It starts when you move. And whatever it is, it knows you're there. Welcome to Unclassified Horror, a place where real encounters, dark legends, and the things we were never meant to see come to life. The channel is going through a hard time right now, and your subscription genuinely keeps these stories alive and growing. So if you enjoy real, chilling horror, consider subscribing. It truly helps more than you think. Now, turn off the lights, make sure you're alone in the room, and let's begin. My name is Connor Whitfield. I'm a wilderness ranger for the George Washington National Forest along the Virginia section of the Appalachian Trail. In August of 2024, I investigated reports of a dark substance contaminating a creek near Humpback Rocks. What I found was a massive white oak tree, at least 300 years old, covered in strange carvings and actively bleeding. Not metaphorically, literally bleeding. And when I tried to help it, I discovered something impossible. The tree was alive, not just biologically, consciously. And it had been waiting for someone who would fight to protect it. The first report came in on August 12th. A day hiker called the ranger station to report that the water in Mill Creek had turned dark and cloudy. "It smells like rust," she said, "like old blood." I hiked out to investigate that afternoon. Mill Creek is a small tributary that feeds into larger waterways. Clear water, rocky bottom. But when I arrived, the water was definitely discolored, a dark brownish red. And the smell, metallic, like iron. I followed the creek upstream to find the source. About a mile up, I found it. A massive white oak tree standing on the eastern bank. Its trunk was at least 8 feet in diameter, ancient, gnarled, and carved. The entire trunk, from ground level to about 10 feet up, was covered in symbols. Not modern graffiti. These were deep cuts, deliberate patterns, spirals, crosses, circles, and words in a language I didn't recognize. But what drew my attention immediately was the liquid flowing from the carvings. Dark red fluid oozed from every carved line, thick, viscous. It ran down the bark in rivulets, pooling at the base of the tree before seeping into the ground and flowing into the creek. I put on gloves, collected a sample in a specimen jar. The substance was warm, body temperature, and it smelled exactly like blood. I radioed the station. I found the source of the creek contamination. There's a tree here that appears to be secreting some kind of red sap or resin. I'm collecting samples for analysis. My supervisor, Frank Delaney, responded, "Roger that. Be careful around that area. We've had issues with a local family near Humpback Rocks, the Corrigan family. If you see anyone, call for backup. I'd heard of the Corrigans, a reclusive family that lived in a compound about 3 miles from the Appalachian Trail. There were rumors, always rumors in these mountains, that they practiced some kind of folk religion, animal sacrifices, ritual gatherings. Nothing ever proven, but locals avoided them. I examined the carvings more closely. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, concentric circles around the trunk, with radial lines connecting them, like a target or a binding symbol. And at the center, where the largest carving was, the tree was bleeding most heavily. I touched the bark near one of the carvings. The moment my hand made contact, I felt something. A pulse. Not imagined. Physical. Like a heartbeat through the wood. And then, a sensation in my mind. Not words, not images, just pure feeling. Pain, anger, desperation. I pulled my hand back. "What the hell?" I whispered. The tree pulsed again, and this time I understood. The tree was communicating, not through language, through emotion, through sensation. And what it was telling me was, "Help me. They're killing me." I spent 2 hours documenting the site. Photographs, measurements, more samples. As the sun began to set, I heard voices coming from the direction of the Corrigan compound. I moved away from the tree, positioned myself behind a boulder about 30 yards downstream, and watched. 6 people emerged from the forest, all wearing dark clothing. Leading them was a man in his 50s, tall, gaunt, with long gray hair. Behind him, 5 others, all family members based on their similar features. They walked directly to the oak tree. The leader, I later learned his name was Silas Corrigan, pulled a knife from his belt and began cutting a new symbol into the bark. The tree began bleeding more heavily, dark fluid gushing from the fresh wound, and I felt it again, that pulse of emotion, agony. The tree was screaming, silently, but I could feel it in my bones. The Corrigans formed a circle around the tree, began chanting. The language was old, not English, something older, something that made the air feel heavy, wrong. I should have stayed hidden, called for backup, but I couldn't. The tree's pain was overwhelming, drowning out rational thought. I stood up, stepped into view. "Stop!" I shouted. "You're on federal land. This tree is protected." The Corrigans turned. Silas smiled, not friendly, predatory. "Ranger," he said slowly, "this doesn't concern you. This is sacred work." "You're vandalizing a centuries-old tree," I said. "Leave now, or I'm calling this in as destruction of federal property." Silas took a step toward me. "That tree," he said, "is an abomination. It shouldn't exist, and we're going to make sure it doesn't." Behind him, the oak tree bled harder. The ground around its base was dark and wet. "Last warning," I said. I had my hand on my radio. Frank was quiet for a moment. "Connor," he said carefully, "are you sure you want to get involved with the Corrigans? They're problematic, and they claim religious protection." "I don't care," I said. "They're destroying a protected tree on federal land. That's illegal. I need backup." The next morning, I returned to the oak tree at dawn. The bleeding had stopped overnight, but the carvings was still there, deep, permanent. I set up a perimeter, placed traffic cones and caution tape around the tree. Not that it would stop anyone, but it established official protection. At 10 a.m., the Corrigans returned, all 6 of them, plus 2 more, 8 total. Silas saw me standing between them and the tree. "You're still here," he said. "This is federal land," I said. "That tree is now under active protection. If you attempt to damage it, I will arrest you for destruction of federal property." Silas smiled again. "You're one man. There are 8 of us, and you don't understand what you're protecting." He took a step forward. I keyed my radio. Backup needed at my location. Multiple trespassers refusing to leave. Static. I tried again. More static. Silas laughed. "Your radios won't work here, not when we're present. The tree disrupts them. It's part of what makes it an abomination." The Corrigans spread out, surrounding me, surrounding the tree. Silas pulled out his knife, began walking toward the oak. I stepped in front of him. "Stop." He didn't. I grabbed his wrist. He shoved me backward, hard. I stumbled, but kept my footing. The other Corrigans closed in. And then, the tree pulsed. It wasn't just in my mind this time. It was physical, a wave of pressure that radiated from the trunk. The Corrigans stopped, all of them, frozen mid-step, and I felt the tree's emotion again. Rage. The oak tree was fighting back, not physically, but psychically, pushing against the Corrigans, repelling them. But it was costing the tree. The carvings began bleeding again, heavily, dark fluid pouring out, and I felt the tree's pain surge through me, overwhelming, crippling. I fell to my knees. The psychic pressure was crushing. It felt like my skull was being compressed. Silas broke through the tree's resistance, took another step forward, raised his knife. I forced myself to stand, ran at him, tackled him before the blade could touch bark. We hit the ground. The knife fell. The other Corrigans rushed forward, grabbed me, pulled me off Silas, and the tree screamed. Not with sound, with feeling, pure, raw terror flooding through me, through all of us. The Corrigans released me, staggered backward, holding their heads. Silas was on the ground, blood running from his nose. "The tree," he gasped. "It's in my head. Get it out." The others were panicking, running, fleeing into the forest. Only Silas remained, writhing on the ground, screaming. And then my patrol vehicle appeared through the trees. Frank had driven up the old fire road, brought 2 other rangers with him. They saw Silas on the ground, saw me standing over him, saw the bleeding tree. "What happened?" Frank asked. "The tree defended itself, psychically. I know how that sounds, but it's true." Frank stared at the oak, at the blood pouring from the carvings. "Jesus," he whispered. We arrested Silas Corrigan for trespassing and attempted vandalism. The other family members were picked up later at their compound, all charged, all prosecuted, all convicted. The moment Silas was placed in handcuffs and removed from the area, the tree stopped bleeding. Instantly, like a faucet being turned off, The dark fluid stopped flowing. The wounds closed. Not healed. The carvings remained, but sealed, dormant. I placed my hand on the bark one more time. The pulse was there, steady, strong, and the emotion, gratitude, protection, and one more thing, bond. The tree had chosen me, marked me, made it its protector. That was 3 months ago. I still patrol the Appalachian Trail, but I visit that oak tree every week. I don't know what it is exactly. A guardian spirit, a forest sentinel, a consciousness that developed over 300 years of watching humans. But I know it's real, and I know it's aware, and I know that I'm connected to it in a way I don't fully understand. Sometimes, when I'm miles away, I feel its pulse, distant, faint, but present. And sometimes, when I'm near the tree, I hear things. Not words, just knowledge, information flowing into my mind about the forest, about threats, about people who mean harm. The tree is teaching me, preparing me. For what? I don't know. The Corrigans are in prison, but they're not the only ones. There are other families in these mountains, other groups that practice old rituals, that target specific trees, specific locations, specific entities they believe shouldn't exist. And the tree has shown me that it's not alone. There are others, other ancient trees, other guardians, other sentient beings hidden in the deep forests of the Appalachian Mountains, all of them watching, waiting, and all of them hoping that someone will choose to protect them. If you ever hike the Appalachian Trail near Humpback Rocks, you might see a massive white oak on the eastern bank of Mill Creek. You might notice the strange carvings on its trunk. You might even see faint stains where dark fluid once flowed. If you do, place your hand on the bark, gently, respectfully, and listen, not with your ears, with your mind, because the tree is aware, and if it trusts you, it will let you feel what it feels, and you'll understand that some trees are more than just trees. Some forests have been watching us far longer than we've been watching them, and some beings are older and wiser than we can imagine, and they're waiting for humans who will choose to protect instead of destroy. If these stories are keeping you hooked, subscribe and stay with us in the dark. Let's proceed with the next story. The first time I heard it, I was maybe 6 miles into the Shenandoah backcountry, following a ridgeline that overlooked a valley so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. I hadn't seen another person in nearly 7 hours. That was the point. I'd come out here to be alone, to clear my head, to let the silence scrub out all the noise I'd been carrying around for the past year. But silence has a way of becoming its own kind of noise after a while. Your ears start reaching for something to hold on to, a bird, a breeze, anything. What I heard was my mother's voice. Not really. I knew that even then. It was just a whisper, barely there, carried on a wind that wasn't blowing. But it said the one thing only she ever said, the name she gave me when I was too small to remember. A stupid baby name, the kind of thing you'd take to your grave before you'd ever admit it to another living soul. Bubby? I stopped dead on the trail. My heart just seized up in my chest. I turned around slowly, scanning the tree line behind me. Nothing. Just bare oaks and tangled undergrowth and the long shadows of late afternoon. My backpack felt suddenly heavy on my shoulders. My mouth went dry. I told myself it was a hiker, some local playing a joke. But that name, no one knows that name. My mother died when I was 19. My father never used it. I've never told a girlfriend, never told a friend. It was a ghost of a word, buried so deep I hadn't thought about it in years. My name is Caleb, and I came to the mountains because I needed to figure out if I still wanted to be alive. That sounds dramatic, I know it does, but I'd hit a wall. 34 years old, divorced, estranged from my only brother, stuck in a job that felt like waiting for death. I'd spent the last 6 months in a one-bedroom apartment in Harrisonburg, staring at walls, not answering phone calls, watching the days blur together. My therapist, a patient woman named Diane, who I'd been seeing twice a week, suggested I find a way to reconnect with something, anything. I used to love hiking. Before the marriage, before the slow unraveling, before I became someone I didn't recognize. So I planned a 4-day loop in a remote section of the park. No cell service, no emergency beacon, just me, my tent, and enough dehydrated food to keep me going. I wanted to see if I could still feel something. The first day and a half were fine. Hard, but fine. My legs remembered the rhythm even if my lungs didn't. I set up camp the first night next to a small stream, cooked my dinner, watched the stars come out. I felt lonely, but it was a clean kind of lonely, honest. I thought maybe Diane was right. Maybe this was working. Then came the voice. After it whispered that name, I stood on the trail for a full minute, waiting. The woods were perfectly still. No birds, no rustling leaves, just that heavy, watchful quiet you get right before a storm breaks. But the sky was clear. I finally forced myself to keep walking, telling myself it was exhaustion, dehydration, the thin mountain air playing tricks on my ears. I'd gone too long without enough water. That was it. Simple explanation. I made camp that night earlier than I'd planned. I found a flat spot, maybe 30 yards off the main trail, in a small clearing surrounded by rhododendron thickets. The light was fading fast, and I didn't want to be caught hiking in the dark. I set up my tent, strung my bear bag, and built a small fire more for comfort than necessity. I was sitting by that fire, watching the flames, when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a voice, clear and close, like someone standing just behind me in the dark. It was my own voice, my own damn voice, but wrong, flatter, emptier, like a recording played back on dying batteries. "You should have picked up the phone, Caleb." I spun around so fast I nearly fell into the fire. Nothing. Just the dark shapes of the rhododendrons, the deeper black of the forest beyond. My breath was coming in sharp shasps. My hand went to the knife on my belt, a reflex I didn't even know I had. "Who's there?" My voice cracked on the last word. No answer. I stood there for a long time, knife out, staring into the dark. The fire crackled behind me, throwing my shadow huge and wavering against the trees. And then the voice came again, from a different direction, from my left, from inside the tree line. "He was your brother, and you let him drown." That wasn't true. That wasn't fair. My brother Derek didn't drown. He drank himself into a coma over 3 years, and I watched it happen, and I did nothing. I sent texts he didn't answer. I left voicemails he never played. And then one day, the phone rang, and it was a hospital administrator in Roanoke telling me he was gone. I didn't even go to the funeral. I told myself it was too far, too expensive, too painful. The truth was, I was too ashamed to look at what was left of him in a box. You could have saved him. One phone call, one visit, but you were too busy, too important, too broken yourself. I started yelling then, just screaming into the trees, telling it to shut up, telling it to show itself, telling it none of it was true. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew some of them were. The worst ones. The ones I'd never said out loud. Those were true. The voice didn't answer. The woods went silent again. I spent that night inside my tent, knife in my hand, not sleeping. Every rustle of wind, every snap of a twig sent a jolt through my chest. But the voice didn't come back. Not that night. Morning came gray and cold. I broke camp fast, didn't bother with coffee, just wanted to move. I told myself I'd hike out, cut the trip short, get back to my truck and drive home. I'd tell Diane the mountains weren't ready for me yet. I'd figure something else out. But the trail didn't go the way I remembered. I'd studied the map, I'd memorized the route, but somewhere around midday I realized I hadn't seen a single blaze marker in hours. The path I was following was faint, overgrown, nothing like the well-maintained trail I'd started on. I stopped, pulled out my compass, tried to orient myself. The needle spun lazily, never settling. I shook it, tapped it. Nothing. Just a slow, useless circle. That's when the voice came back, and this time it was laughing. Not loud, just a soft, amused chuckle, like someone watching a joke unfold. It came from everywhere at once, from the trees, from the ground, from inside my own skull. Lost, Caleb? You've been lost for years. You just didn't know it yet. I started walking, fast, not caring about direction, just needing to move, needing to leave that sound behind. I crashed through undergrowth, pushed past branches that whipped back and stung my face. My backpack caught on thorns, nearly pulled me off balance. I didn't stop. I couldn't. You know what Diane would say if she could see you now. She'd say you're spiraling. She'd say you need to ground yourself. She'd use that calm, patient voice she uses when she's trying not to admit you're a lost cause. It knew about Diane. It knew her name. It knew the exact cadence of her voice, the way she'd lean forward in her chair and fold her hands when she was about to say something important. I'd never told anyone that, not a single person. But the voice knew.
She doesn't believe in you, Caleb. She never did. She just needed the copay. I stumbled into a small clearing and collapsed against a fallen log. My legs were shaking. My lungs were burning. I pulled out my water bottle and drank until I choked. The voice was quiet now, but I could feel it waiting, listening, like it was savoring the moment. I sat there for a long time, head in my hands, trying to think, trying to remember what Diane actually said. She said progress isn't linear. She said healing takes time. She said I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. Had she said those things? Yes, I think so. But the voice's version was louder in my head, more convincing. You know what you should do, the voice whispered, soft and close, like a lover's breath against my ear. You know what would make it all stop. There's a cliff about a quarter-mile east of here, a nice long drop. You wouldn't feel a thing, just peace, finally, after all these years. I pressed my palms against my ears so hard I saw stars, but the voice didn't come through my ears. It came from inside, from the part of me that had been whispering the same thing for months, only quieter, only softer. The voice was just turning up the volume on my own darkest thoughts. "No," I said out loud. "No, I'm not doing this." I stood up. I forced myself to think. Diane always said, when the spiral starts, find something physical, something that demands your full attention, something that leaves no room for the noise. I looked around the clearing. Deadfall everywhere, sticks, branches, whole trees brought down by wind and age. I started gathering wood. I didn't know what I was building. A signal fire? A bonfire? Just something big, something that would take all my focus. I dragged branches, snapped smaller sticks, piled them in the center of the clearing. The voice watched. I could feel it. At first it was quiet, curious. Then it started again. "This is pathetic. You think stacking wood is going to save you? You think Diane's little coping exercises work against something like me? I've been here longer than these mountains. I've whispered to every lost soul who stumbled through these woods. And you know what? They all listened, every single one. Some of them are still here, under the leaves, feeding the roots." I kept working. My hands were getting raw, splinters driving deep into my palms. I didn't care. The pile grew, knee-high, waist-high, chest-high. I was breathing hard, sweating despite the cold. "You're going to build this fire, and then what? You'll watch it burn, and then you'll be alone again, with me, forever. I can wait, Caleb. I've waited centuries for a meal as rich as you." I pressed my backpack and dug out the small emergency radio I'd brought. Stupid thing. I didn't even know why I packed it. No cell service, but I thought maybe I could pick up a weather report. I hadn't turned it on once. I flicked the power switch. Static hissed out, loud and harsh in the quiet clearing. The voice recoiled. I felt it, a physical sensation, like a pressure lifting from my skull. "What are you doing?" The voice was different now, less confident, sharper. I turned the volume up. The static filled the clearing, that empty, formless noise of dead air between stations. I held the radio out in front of me like a shield and walked to the edge of the trees. "Get out of my head," I said. The voice didn't answer, but I heard something else, a sound from the forest itself, a low, rumbling sigh. Not disappointed, not angry, just immensely, profoundly tired, like something ancient and vast had been disturbed from a long nap and found the interruption not worth the effort. The static continued to hiss. I stood there, holding the radio until my arm ached. The sun was starting to drop toward the ridgeline. I had maybe an hour of light left. I built the fire. I don't know why. Maybe because I'd started it. Maybe because I needed to see something I'd made with my own hands actually exist. I lit it with my last match, and it caught fast, the dry leaves and twigs igniting with a whoosh. The flames climbed higher, reaching towards the darkening sky, and for the first time since I heard my mother's voice on that trail, I felt warm. I sat by that fire all night. The voice didn't come back. The woods stayed quiet. Once, around midnight, I thought I heard movement in the dark beyond the firelight. Heavy, slow footsteps, the sound of something large breathing. But it never came closer, and by dawn it was gone. I found the main trail by noon the next day. I hiked out, reached my truck, drove home. I didn't tell Diane everything, just that the trip got hard and I came back early. She nodded, made a note, asked if I wanted to talk about it. I said no. Last night, I was going through the photos on my phone, looking for a picture of the view from that first night, the one by the stream. I scrolled back through my camera roll, Past the shots of my campsite, past the selfies I'd taken on the trail, past the pictures of my apartment, my truck, my face in a bathroom mirror. They were all black. Not deleted, just black. Empty black rectangles like someone had taken a marker to every image. I kept scrolling, faster and faster, all the way back to photos from months ago, years ago. My wedding, my brother at a cookout, my mother in a hospital bed holding my hand. All black, every single one. The last photo in my camera roll was taken yesterday, after I got home. A picture of my living room, something mundane I'd sent to a friend to prove I was alive. I stared at it for a long time. It was still normal, still there. But as I watched, it flickered, just for a moment, a ripple of black across the screen, like a shadow passing over water. And then it was normal again. I put the phone down. I haven't picked it up since. I'm writing this on my laptop, which doesn't have any photos on it, which doesn't have a camera, which can't see me sitting here in the apartment, in the dark, wondering if the voice is really gone, or if it's just waiting for me to forget, waiting for me to turn off the static and let the silence come back. Because silence always comes back. And when it does, I'll be here, listening. And somewhere in the mountains, something will be listening too, waiting to whisper my name, waiting to remind me of everything I've ever done wrong, waiting to finish what it started.
The first thing I noticed was that my legs didn't hurt. That might sound like a good thing. It's not. Not when you've been hiking for 6 hours straight up a ridgeline that should have your quads screaming and your knees threatening to buckle. Not when you're carrying a 40-pound pack and you haven't stopped for water in over 2 hours. Not when you should be exhausted, starving, ready to drop, and instead you feel like you just stepped out of your front door for a Sunday stroll. I didn't realize it at first. None of us did. We were too busy enjoying how easy the trail was, how smooth, how perfectly graded, like someone had come through with a landscaping crew and manicured every inch of it. No roots to trip over, no rocks to turn an ankle on, no mud, no loose gravel. Just packed earth, firm and level, winding through the trees like a carpet rolled out just for us. It felt like walking on a treadmill set to 0 incline, effortless. That should have been the first sign. But when you're 3 days into a backpacking trip and your feet are blistered and your back aches and you finally find a stretch of trail that doesn't feel like punishment, you don't question it. You just thank whatever lucky star crossed your path and keep moving. My name is Trevor, and I've been hiking the Appalachian Trail on and off for about 8 years. Not through hiking, just sections, long weekends, vacation weeks, whatever I could squeeze in. I'm not an expert, but I know the woods. I know when a trail feels right and when it feels wrong. That trail felt wrong from the moment we found it, but it took us hours to admit that to each other. The trip started normal enough. Me and 2 friends, Dylan and Mia. We'd planned a 4-day loop in the Pisgah National Forest, just over the North Carolina line. Dylan was the experienced one, former Boy Scout, could start a fire with wet wood and navigate by the stars. Mia was newer to backpacking, but she was tough, the kind of quiet, stubborn that just keeps putting one foot in front of the other no matter what. We'd done a few trips together over the past couple years. Good group, good balance. Day 1 was fine. Day 2 was fine. We made good time, saw some views, ate some dehydrated pasta, slept in tents, normal stuff. Day 3 morning, we packed up camp and consulted the map. We had about 8 miles to our next planned site, a shelter near a waterfall. The map showed a clear route, a blue-blazed trail that connected to the main AT section we'd been following. But when we got to the junction, the blue-blazed trail was gone. Overgrown,
blocked by fallen trees, impossible to follow. We stood there for a while, trying to figure out where we'd gone wrong. That's when Dylan spotted it. About 20 yards past the overgrown trail, there was a gap in the trees, a narrow opening, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. And leading into that gap was a path. Not a trail, not really. More like a corridor. The ground was smooth, the undergrowth on either side was thick, impenetrable, but the path itself was clear. "That's not on the map," Mia said. Dylan pulled out his compass, checked his phone, frowned. "It heads the right direction. Maybe it's an old logging road, connects back up further on." I didn't like it. Something about the way the trees leaned in on either side, the way the light seemed different further in, dimmer, thicker. But the alternative was bushwhacking for miles through rhododendron thickets, and none of us were eager for that. "We'll take it for a mile," I said. "If it doesn't connect, we turn back." That first mile was paradise. I'm not exaggerating. The trail was so smooth, so perfectly level that we started joking about it, about the trail fairy, about some ultra runner who'd come through with a shovel and a leveling tool. We laughed, we chatted, we walked, and we walked, and we walked. After about 3 miles, Mia stopped. "Hey," she said, "when's the last time we ate?" We looked at each other. I tried to remember breakfast. We'd eaten breakfast, right? We'd stopped at that stream, boiled water, had oatmeal. That was... I checked my watch. It was 2 p.m. That was 7 hours ago. "I'm not hungry," Dylan said. His voice was strange, puzzled. "I should be starving. I'm not even a little hungry." I realized I wasn't either. Not even a rumble, not even a passing thought about food, and I hadn't taken a single sip from my bladder since that morning. I pulled it out, shook it, still half full. I should have drained it twice over by now. "We need to turn back," I said. We turned around. We walked for what felt like another hour. The trail looked exactly the same, smooth, level, bordered by that impenetrable wall of undergrowth. No landmarks, no changes, just endless, identical corridor. "We should have hit the junction by now," Dylan said. He was staring at his compass again. The needle was steady, but his face was pale. We kept walking. Another hour, nothing. That's when the panic started to set in. Not loud panic, quiet panic, the kind that sits in your chest and makes your breathing shallow. Mia grabbed my arm. "Trevor, look at the trees." I looked. They were all the same. Same species, same spacing, same height. Like a planted forest, but older, much older. And they all leaned slightly inward toward the trail, like they were watching, like they were waiting. "We need to go off trail," I said. "Cut straight through the woods, find a ridgeline, get our bearings." Dylan shook his head. "That undergrowth is thick. We'd barely make 100 yards an hour." "We have to try." We stepped off the path together. The moment my foot touched the ground beyond the trail, I felt it. A pressure, like walking into a strong wind, but the air was still. The undergrowth was dense, branches grabbing at our clothes, thorns tearing at our skin. We pushed forward maybe 10 feet, 20. It was exhausting. Real, genuine effort. My muscles remembered what exhaustion felt like. My lungs remembered what burning felt like. It was awful. It was the most real I felt all day. Then the forest pushed back.
I don't know how else to describe it. The ground itself seemed to shift. The branches we'd pushed past swung back, harder, striking our faces. The thorns dug in deeper, and beneath our feet the earth began to move. Not an earthquake, more like a slow, relentless tilt. Like the whole forest was a single surface, and it was tilting us back toward the trail. We fought it, for maybe a minute, but the tilt got steeper.
The branches became a wall, and then, all at once, we were tumbling, sliding, falling backward through the undergrowth, and we landed in a heap on the smooth, perfect trail. The moment we hit it, the exhaustion vanished. The pain vanished. We just lay there, breathing easy, feeling fine. Mia started crying. Not loud, just silent tears running down her face. "It doesn't want us to leave," Dylan whispered. He was staring at the tree line, at the place where we'd just been pushed back. The undergrowth looked undisturbed, like we'd never even tried. We sat there for a long time. The light hadn't changed. That was another thing. It was always the same light, golden, hazy, like late afternoon, but it never got later, never got darker. We'd been walking for what felt like 10 hours, but the sun hadn't moved. "It's feeding on us," Mia said. Her voice was hollow. "That's why we're not tired. That's why we're not hungry. It's taking it, all of it. The effort, the exhaustion, the need. It's eating our life force." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't, because I'd felt it. That moment off the trail when the effort came back, that was real. That was us, and the trail had stolen it. "We have to feel it again," Dylan said. He stood up. His face was set, determined. "We have to break whatever spell this is. We have to make ourselves hurt." He pulled out his knife. Before I could stop him, he drew the blade across his forearm. Not deep, but enough. Blood welled up, bright red against his skin. He gasped, not from pain, from relief, because for that moment he felt something real. Then the cut closed. I watched it happen. The bleeding stopped. The skin knitted together. In 3 seconds, it was like it never happened. A thin white scar maybe, but fresh blood, gone. Pain, gone. "It healed," Mia whispered. "The trail healed it." Dylan stared at his arm. The knife was still in his hand. He looked at me, and I saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. Real terror. The kind that comes when you realize you're up against something you can't fight, can't wound, can't even understand. "Then we have to do more," I said. "We have to hurt ourselves more than it can heal." We looked at each other. The trail stretched out in both directions, smooth and patient and waiting. Waiting for us to give up. Waiting for us to just keep walking, keep feeding it until there was nothing left to take. "We build a fire," I said, "a big one. We burn ourselves." It sounds insane. I know it sounds insane, but when you're trapped in a place that steals your exhaustion, that steals your hunger, that steals your pain, you start to realize those things aren't the enemy. They're proof you're alive. They're the signals your body sends to tell you you're still here, still fighting, still human. Without them, you're just meat, walking meat waiting to be consumed. We gathered wood. It was easy. There was deadfall everywhere, dry and ready. The trail didn't stop us. It didn't seem to care. Maybe it didn't understand what we were planning. Or maybe it thought we couldn't go through with it. We built the fire in the middle of the trail. A big pile, chest high. I used my last match to light it. The flames caught fast, roaring up into that unchanging golden light. The heat was immense. We stood back from it, watching it burn, and for the first time in hours, I felt warm, really warm. Not the fake comfort of the trail, actual heat. "Now what?" Mia shouted over the crackling. I didn't answer. I just stepped forward and put my hand into the fire. The pain was immediate, overwhelming, the most real thing I'd ever felt. My skin blackened, blistered, burned. I screamed. I couldn't help it, but I kept my hand there. 3 seconds. 5. Dylan grabbed my shoulders and pulled me back. I fell to the ground, cradling my hand, watching the flesh bubble and peel. It didn't heal. I don't know how else to describe it. The ground itself seemed to shift. The branches we'd pushed past swung back harder, striking our faces. The thorns dug in deeper, and beneath our feet, the earth began to move. Not an earthquake, more like a slow, relentless tilt. Like the whole forest was a single surface, and it was tilting us back toward the trail. We fought it for maybe a minute, but the tilt got steeper. The branches became a wall, and then, all at once, we were tumbling, sliding, falling backward through the undergrowth, and we landed in a heap on the smooth, perfect trail. The moment we hit it, the exhaustion vanished. The pain vanished. We just lay there, breathing easy, feeling fine. Mia started crying. Not loud, just silent tears running down her face. "It doesn't want us to leave," Dylan whispered. He was staring at the tree line, at the place where we'd just been pushed back. The undergrowth looked undisturbed, like we'd never even tried. We sat there for a long time. The light hadn't changed. That was another thing. It was always the same light, golden, hazy, like late afternoon, but it never got later, never got darker. We'd been walking for what felt like 10 hours, but the sun hadn't moved. "It's feeding on us," Mia said. Her voice was hollow. "That's why we're not tired. That's why we're not hungry. It's taking it, all of it. The effort, the exhaustion, the need. It's eating our life force." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't, because I'd felt it. That moment off the trail when the effort came back, that was real. That was us, and the trail had stolen it. "We have to feel it again," Dylan said. He stood up. His face was set, determined. "We have to break whatever spell this is. We have to make ourselves hurt." He pulled out his knife. Before I could stop him, he drew the blade across his forearm. Not deep, but enough. Blood welled up, bright red against his skin. He gasped, not from pain, from relief, because for that moment he felt something real. Then the cut closed. I watched it happen. The bleeding stopped. The skin knitted together. In 3 seconds, it was like it never happened. A thin white scar, maybe, but fresh blood, gone. Pain, gone. "It healed," Mia whispered. "The trail healed it." Dylan stared at his arm. The knife was still in his hand. He looked at me, and I saw real fear in his eyes for the first time, real terror. The kind that comes when you realize you're up against something you can't fight, can't wound, can't even understand. "Then we have to do more," I said. "We have to hurt ourselves more than it can heal." We looked at each other. The trail stretched out in both directions, smooth and patient and waiting for us to give up, waiting for us to just keep walking, keep feeding it until there was nothing left to take. We build a fire, a big one. We burn ourselves. It sounds insane. I know it sounds insane, but when you're trapped in a place that steals your exhaustion, that steals your hunger, that steals your pain, you start to realize those things aren't the enemy. They're proof you're alive. They're the signals your body sends to tell you you're still here, still fighting, still human. Without them, you're just meat, walking meat waiting to be consumed. We gathered wood. It was easy. There was deadfall everywhere, dry and ready. The trail didn't stop us. It didn't seem to care. Maybe it didn't understand what we were planning. Or maybe it thought we couldn't go through with it. We built the fire in the middle of the trail, a big pile, chest high. I used my last match to light it. The flames caught fast, roaring up into that unchanging golden light. The heat was immense. We stood back from it, watching it burn, and for the first time in hours, I felt warm. Really warm. Not the fake comfort of the trail. Actual heat. "Now what?" Mia shouted over the crackling. I didn't answer. I just stepped forward and put my hand into the fire. The pain was immediate, overwhelming, the most real thing I'd ever felt. My skin blackened, blistered, burned. I screamed, I couldn't help it, but I kept my hand there. 3 seconds. 5. Dylan grabbed my shoulders and pulled me back. I fell to the ground, cradling my hand, watching the flesh bubble and peel. It didn't heal. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not decay, but something else, something older. The smell of dust and dry bones and the inside of a tomb that's been sealed for 1,000 years. I'd been a backcountry ranger in the Pisgah district for almost 6 years, and I'd come across dead things before. Deer, mostly. Once a black bear that had fallen off a cliff. But this was different. This smell didn't come from something that had died recently. It came from something that had been dead for so long it had forgotten what being alive felt like. I found the truck first, an old Forest Service pickup, same model as the one I drove, parked at the end of an abandoned logging road about 12 miles from the nearest maintained trail. No plates on it, no registration sticker, just bare metal and rust, and a layer of dust so thick it looked like it had been sitting there for decades. The keys were in the ignition. I turned them. The engine was dead. Not out of gas dead. Dead, dead. Like it had never run at all. I radioed it in. Dispatch said they'd send someone, but it would be hours. I decided to wait. Standard procedure. But while I was waiting, I noticed something. A path leading away from the truck into the woods. Not a trail, just a faint depression in the undergrowth, like something had been dragged that way a long time ago. I should have waited. I know that now. But I was curious, and curious gets people like me killed. My name is Lucas, and I've worked for the National Park Service for 11 years. Started in the Smokies, transferred over to Pisgah about 6 years back. It's the kind of job that gets in your blood. The solitude, the silence, the sense that you're the only person for miles in any direction. I've never been married, no kids, just the woods and the work, and a small apartment in Brevard that I use mostly for storage. The woods are my home. Or they were. I'm not sure what they are now. I followed that path for maybe a quarter mile. It led to a small clearing, the kind of place someone might set up a camp if they wanted to disappear for a while. There was a fire ring, cold and full of ash. A tattered tent collapsed and half buried under leaves, and next to the tent, propped against a fallen log, was a skeleton. I've seen skeletons before, training exercises mostly, but this one was different. It was sitting upright, legs stretched out in front of it, arms at its sides, like it had just sat down to rest and never gotten up. The clothes were still there, a ranger's uniform, the same shade of green I was wearing, the same patches on the shoulders, the same badge on the chest. I took a step closer. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Some other ranger years ago who got lost, got hurt, died out here alone. It happens. It's tragic, but it happens. Then I saw the pin. Above the badge, on the left pocket, there was a small pin. A silver arrowhead, the kind they give you when you complete the advanced backcountry training course. I have one just like it. I was wearing it, right then, on my own left pocket. I touched my pocket, felt the pin under my fingers. Then I looked at the skeleton's pocket. The pin was there. Identical. Same size, same shape, same tarnish pattern on the silver. My brain started scrambling for explanations. Maybe it was a standard issue thing. Maybe a lot of rangers had that pin. Maybe I was just spooking myself for no reason. I knelt down next to the skeleton. The skull was tilted slightly to the side, empty eye sockets staring off into the trees. The jaw hung open in a permanent, silent scream. I forced myself to look at the hands. The bones were fragile, chalky, like they'd been in the sun for 100 years. The left hand was resting on the thigh. The right hand was curled loosely at the side. On the right hand, on the third finger, there was a ring. I stopped breathing. It was a simple ring, silver band, slightly worn, with a small engraving on the inside. A date, March 12, my parents' anniversary. It had been my father's ring. He gave it to me the day he died, 6 years ago. took it off his own finger and pressed it into my palm and told me to wear it, to remember him, to remember that some things last longer than people do. I'd worn it every single day since then. I was wearing it right now. I looked down at my own hand. The ring was there. Same silver, same wear pattern on the inside, same date engraved, invisible to anyone but me. I looked back at the skeleton's hand. The ring was there too. I stumbled backward, nearly fell over a root. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be possible. It was a copy, a replica. Someone had made a replica and put it on this skeleton as some kind of sick joke. That had to be it. But the clothes, the uniform, the pin, the ring, all of it matching, all of it exactly right. And the skeleton wasn't new. Those bones had been there for years, decades maybe, long before I ever became a ranger, long before my father died and gave me his ring. I forced myself to look closer, to really see. The uniform was old, faded, threadbare, but the cut was the same as mine. The boots were the same model I wore, the belt buckle was the same standard issue, and on the skull, just above the left temple, there was a small crack, a fracture healed over long before death. I have a scar there, from a fall when I was 12, hit my head on a rock, needed stitches. The bone healed over, but there's always a slight ridge, a dip you can feel if you run your finger over it. That skeleton had the same ridge. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, maybe longer. The woods were absolutely silent. No birds, no wind, no insects, just me and that thing that was me and wasn't me, sitting together in that small clearing like we were waiting for something. Then I heard it, a sound from deeper in the woods, a heavy, dragging footstep, then another, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I didn't move, couldn't move. I just sat there frozen, listening to those footsteps get nearer and nearer. Whatever was making them wasn't trying to be quiet. It was moving with the confidence of something that knew it was the only predator for miles. The footsteps stopped, just on the other side of the tree line, maybe 30 feet away. I could hear breathing, deep, wet, labored breathing, like something with damaged lungs trying to pull air through fluid.
And then I heard something else. A voice. My voice. My own voice, but wrong. Slurred. Thick. Like it was speaking through a mouth full of mud. Don't look at it. The skeleton. The voice came from the skeleton. Its jaw hadn't moved, but the voice was there, inside my head, coming from those empty eye sockets. Don't look. It's still here. It's always here. It got me. It'll get you too if you don't move. The footsteps in the woods started again. Closer. Whatever it was circling the clearing, moving through the trees just out of sight. What do? I whispered. I didn't know if I was talking to the skeleton, or to myself, or to whatever was out there in the dark. The remains, the voice said. It was fainter now, harder to hear. Destroy the remains. Break the link. It's the only way. It followed me through. It'll follow you too. Burn us. Burn me. Do it now. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to question. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could see something now. A shape moving between the trees. Tall, too tall. Thin in a way that didn't look right, like its limbs had been stretched past their natural length. I scrambled for my pack, found my lighter, the same cheap plastic lighter I'd used 100 times to start campfires. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. I grabbed handfuls of dry leaves, dead twigs, anything that would burn, and I piled them on the skeleton, on me, on the bones that were my bones and weren't my bones. The shape was at the edge of the clearing now.
I could see it clearly. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle. Its arms hung too low, knuckles dragging the ground. Its skin was gray, mottled like something that had been underwater for too long. And its face was mine, but not mine. Older, more tired, more dead. It was the face I'd see in the mirror if I lived another 40 years and spent every one of them in agony. It opened its mouth. No sound came out, just a long, slow exhalation of rot. I flicked the lighter. The leaves caught, the twigs caught, the flames spread to the uniform, to the old dry fabric, to the bones beneath. The skeleton burned. It burned fast, hotter than it should have, the flames leaping up in colors that weren't natural, blue and green and a deep pulsing red. The thing at the edge of the clearing screamed. Not loud, just a thin, high whine, like air escaping a balloon. It raised its two long arms, covering its face, and it stepped backward into the trees. The whine got higher, thinner, and then it stopped. The woods were silent again. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. I watched the skeleton burn until there was nothing left but ash and a few fragments of bone too small to recognize. The ring was gone, melted probably, or maybe it had never been there at all. I don't know. I sat in that clearing until the fire died, and then I sat some more. I didn't report the skeleton. I don't know what I would have said. I found my own remains? I burned them? There was a thing in the woods that looked like a future version of me? They'd have me committed. So I reported the abandoned truck, told them I'd followed the path, found an old campsite, but no sign of the owner. They sent a team out later. They found nothing, just an empty clearing and a pile of cold ash. That was 3 weeks ago. I went back to work. What else was I supposed to do? But things are different now. The woods feel different. Every shadow seems deeper. Every sound makes me jump. I catch myself staring at the tree line, watching for movement, watching for that too tall shape with my face. And there's something else. Last night, I was sitting in my apartment, trying to read, trying to pretend everything was normal. I looked down at my hand, at my father's ring. I've worn it 6 years. I know exactly what it looks like. I know the way the silver catches the light. I know the faint scratch on the band from the time I hit it against a rock. I know it better than my own fingerprints. There's a mark on my finger now, right where the ring sits. A small burn, not a scar, not a rash, a burn, like someone pressed a hot brand against my skin. It's the exact shape of the ring, the exact width, the exact curve, but the ring itself is fine, cool to the touch, normal. I took it off, checked. The burn is on my finger. The ring is unchanged. I put it back on. The burn doesn't hurt. It's just there, a reminder, a brand. I don't know what it means. I don't know if the thing in the woods is gone or if it's just waiting, watching. And part of me wonders if maybe I'm not the one who got away. Maybe I'm the one who's supposed to be sitting against that log, bones bleaching in the sun, while something else wears my face and walks around in my life. Maybe that's why the burn doesn't hurt, because it's not my finger anymore.
My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 71 years old. I was a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for 37 years. I retired in 2018, but I never stopped working. Not really, because the forest is still out there, still choosing, still curating its collection, and I'm the only person who knows the pattern. This is my confession, my warning, and my life's work, because the curator is still out there, still singing, still collecting, and you might be exactly what it's looking for. Let me start at the beginning. Spring of 1996. I was 43 years old, been a ranger for 6 years. I worked the Cherokee National Forest, straddling the North Carolina-Tennessee border. Beautiful territory, old-growth forest, the kind of trees that have been there for centuries, so thick the canopy blocks out the sun in places. And people went missing there. A lot. Now, the Appalachians are dangerous. I'm not denying that. Black bears, rough terrain, sudden weather changes, easy to get turned around. Every year we'd lose a few hikers, usually inexperienced folks who wandered off trail, got lost, succumbed to exposure or injury. Tragic, but explainable. But in early 1996, my supervisor, Chief Ranger Tom Wilkins, called me into his office and dropped a file on my desk. It was thick, real thick. "Hayes," he said, "I need you to look at something, and I need you to keep an open mind." The file contained 5 years of missing persons reports from our section of the forest, 17 cases. I started reading through them, expecting the usual patterns: inexperienced hikers, solo climbers, people who didn't respect the wilderness. But that's not what I found. Every single missing person fit a very specific profile. Ages between 19 and 34, not one person younger or older. Physical condition? Excellent. Hikers, runners, climbers, all in peak physical health. Personality? This was the weird part. According to family interviews, every missing person was described the same way: creative, artistic, sensitive, introspective. Musicians, painters, writers, photographers, people who came to the forest to find inspiration or connect with nature. And here's the kicker: every single one of them disappeared in the same general area, a 14-mile stretch of forest northeast of the Laurel Creek Trail. Different entry points, different trails, but they all vanished within the same zone. "Do you see it?" asked Tom. "Yeah," I said slowly. "This isn't random, this is selective." That's what I thought. But selective how? Why? What's taking them? I didn't have an answer then, but I was about to find one. Over the next 3 months, I became obsessed with those files. I interviewed family members, hiked every trail in the affected zone, studied topographical maps, weather patterns, animal activity, looking for any explanation that made sense. June 14th, 1996. I was interviewing the parents of victim number 17, a 26-year-old nature photographer named Emily Thornton, who'd vanished 3 weeks earlier. Her mother, Carol, was showing me Emily's last photographs. Stunning shots of old-growth forest, moss-covered rocks, streams. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. Emily called me the night before she disappeared. She was so excited. She said she'd heard the most beautiful melody in the forest, like music, but natural. She wanted to find the source and photograph it. I sat up straighter. A melody? What kind of melody? She tried to hum it for me over the phone. It was strange, beautiful, but strange. She said it sounded like the forest itself was singing. She was convinced it was some kind of rare bird or natural acoustic phenomenon. She wanted to track it down. I thanked her and left, but I couldn't shake it. A melody. I went back through all 16 previous cases, started calling family members again, asking specific questions. Had their loved ones mentioned hearing anything unusual? Any sounds? Music? Out of 16 cases, I got 12 confirmations. 12 missing people had mentioned hearing a beautiful, unusual melody in the forest shortly before they disappeared. The 5 who hadn't mentioned it probably heard it too. They just didn't tell anyone. I had my pattern, but I still didn't understand what it meant. July 22nd, 1996. I got the call at 6:47 a.m. Another missing person. Daniel Cross, age 28, musician from Asheville. Experienced hiker. He'd gone into the forest 2 days ago with camping gear and his guitar. He'd told his roommate he was looking for natural acoustics to record for an album. He was supposed to be back yesterday. Wasn't. His car was found at the Laurel Creek trailhead. Tent was set up at a campsite 3 miles in, but Daniel was gone. His guitar was still in the tent, his pack, his food, everything. Just Daniel was missing. I organized a search. 20 volunteers, 3 K9 units. We covered the area in expanding grids. The dogs picked up Daniel's scent leading north from his campsite, deeper into the 14-mile zone. But after about 2 miles, the scent just stopped, like he'd vanished into thin air. After 3 days of searching, we had to scale back operations. Daniel Cross became victim number 18. But I wasn't done. On the 4th night, I went back out alone. I know, stupid, reckless, against every protocol, but I had to understand. I'd spent months studying this pattern. 18 people, all fitting the same profile, all disappearing in the same zone, many of them mentioning the same melody. I needed to know what was out there. I hiked to Daniel's last known location, the spot where the K9 units lost his scent. It was deep in old-growth forest, trees so old and massive they felt like cathedral pillars. The canopy was thick overhead. Even in late afternoon, it was dim. I set up a basic camp, sat down, and waited. Nothing happened for hours. I was starting to feel foolish. The sun set, darkness came. The forest sounds shifted, daybirds to nightbirds, cricket songs, the occasional rustle of small mammals. And then, at 11:47 p.m., I heard it.
God, I can't describe it properly. It wasn't like any music I'd ever heard. It was pure and perfect and wrong all at the same time. Like if you took the most beautiful piece of classical music ever written, stripped away all the instruments, and left only the emotional core of it, the longing, the beauty, the sadness, and somehow turned that into sound. It came from the north, deeper into the forest. And the moment I heard it, I understood why people followed it. Because every cell in my body wanted to go toward that sound. Not wanted, needed. It was like the melody was a hook that had sunk into my chest and was pulling me. No, not pulling, calling. The melody was calling me by name, even though it had no words. I stood up. My flashlight fell from my hands. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting to the source of that sound. I started walking north. Trees passed by in the darkness. I didn't watch where I was going, didn't need to. The melody was guiding me, drawing me in. Every note was a promise of something beautiful just ahead, something I needed to see, to experience, to become part of. I walked for I don't know how long. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. Time didn't mean anything. Only the melody mattered. And then I saw them. People, standing in a clearing, dozens of them, maybe 40, maybe 50, just standing there in the darkness, perfectly still, faces tilted up toward the trees like they were listening to something I couldn't quite hear yet. I recognized some of them from the missing persons files. Emily Thornton, I recognized her from her mother's photographs. Daniel Cross, others I didn't know but who must have been from years past. They were all alive, standing,
breathing, but not moving, not responding, just waiting. And the melody was stronger here, so strong it was vibrating through my bones. I walked into the clearing, found a spot among the others, and stood there, waiting. For what? I didn't know. But the melody would tell me. The melody would show me. All I had to do was listen and wait. And pain. Sudden, shocking, incredible pain in my left hand. I looked down. There was a knife sticking through my palm. My knife. Blood was running down my wrist. And I realized some tiny, still rational part of my brain had driven that knife through my own hand to break the trance. The pain was an anchor, something real and immediate that the melody couldn't drown out. I focused on it, gripped the knife handle with my right hand, and pulled it free. The melody immediately tried to pull me back under, but I bit down on my wounded hand, sent fresh waves of pain through my system, and it gave me just enough clarity to think. Run. I ran. I crashed through the forest like a wounded animal. The melody followed me, not fading with distance. It was everywhere, in every direction, pursuing me like a living thing. I kept running, kept biting my hand, hitting trees with my injured palm, anything to generate enough pain to keep the melody from taking hold again. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs were screaming. My hand was a mess of blood and torn flesh. But I ran until I hit the Laurel Creek Trail, until I saw my truck in the parking lot, until I was inside with the doors locked and the engine running. The melody stopped the moment I crossed out of the forest. Just stopped, like I'd crossed an invisible boundary. I sat there in my truck, shaking, bleeding, trying to process what I'd just experienced. I'd found them. I'd found all the missing people. They were alive, standing in a clearing, waiting. For what? I drove to the hospital, told them I'd had a camping accident, stabbed myself while cutting firewood. They stitched up my hand, gave me antibiotics, sent me home. I didn't file a report, didn't tell Tom what I'd found, because how could I? Who would believe me? Instead, I started researching. I spent the next 6 months in libraries, reading everything I could find about the Appalachian Mountains, local history, indigenous legends, folklore. And I found it, the pattern, the explanation. The Cherokee called it Tthe, or the collector, or the curator. According to their oral traditions, certain forests, old forests, ancient places, had guardians, not benevolent spirits, not protectors, curators. These entities would select specific humans who possessed qualities the forest valued: creativity, artistic vision, emotional depth, the ability to truly see the beauty of nature. The curator would call to these people with a melody, an irresistible song. Those who heard it would follow it into the forest, into the curator's collection, and they would stand there forever, part of the forest. Human galleries, human specimens preserved and displayed for what? The curator's pleasure? Study? We'd never know. The Cherokee avoided certain forests, marked them as forbidden, because once the curator decided to collect you, there was no rescue, no escape. You became part of the gallery. And the forest where I worked, it was one of those places. The 14-mile zone wasn't random. It was the curator's territory, its gallery space. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, it only collected certain types of people, ages 19 to 34, peak physical condition, artistic, creative souls. It was curating its collection, choosing specimens that met specific criteria.
I couldn't save them. That's the hardest part to admit. I went back. God help me, I tried. I brought other rangers. I brought law enforcement. I showed them where the clearing was on the map, but we could never find it again. I hiked that area dozens of times over the next year. The clearing with the standing people, it was gone, or hidden, or only visible when the curator wanted it to be. The only time I could find it was when I heard the melody, and if I heard the melody, I was already being collected, already losing myself to it. I tried bringing other people with me, rangers who fit the profile, young, creative, artistic, thinking maybe they'd hear the melody and I could follow them. That was a mistake. I lost 2 more people that way. 2 young rangers who heard the melody, walked into the forest, and never came back. After that, I stopped trying to find the clearing, started trying to prevent people from being taken in the first place. For the next 20 years, I dedicated my career to mapping the curator's territory. I couldn't stop it from collecting, but I could document it, study it, try to predict it. I kept detailed records of every missing person, plotted their last known locations, tracked patterns in timing, time of year, weather conditions, moon phases, and slowly, over years, I built a map. The curator's territory wasn't static. It moved, shifted, like it was patrolling its forest. The 14-mile zone was its core territory, but the boundaries fluctuated. Some months, the danger zone would expand to 20 miles. Other months, it would contract to 10. I couldn't predict the shifts, but I could track them after the fact. I also identified high-risk times, late spring and early fall, when the forest was at its most beautiful, when artistic, creative people were most likely to visit seeking inspiration. That's when the curator was most active. That's when the melody sang strongest. I started giving lectures to hiking groups, warning them, not about a curator, they'd think I was insane, but about acoustical anomalies in certain parts of the forest, dangerous audio phenomena that could cause disorientation. I convinced the Park Service to post warning signs in the high-risk zones, vague warnings about unusual geological sounds and stay on marked trails. Did it help? Maybe. Missing persons in my section of the forest dropped from 3 or 4 a year to about 1 every 2 years. But people still went missing. The curators still collected. Because you can't stop people from being drawn to beauty. And the curator's melody was the most beautiful sound in the world.
In 2015, I heard the melody again. I was 62 years old, doing a routine patrol, and there it was, faint, distant, but unmistakable. I didn't follow it this time. I'd learned, but I marked the location on my GPS. That night, I went home and updated my map. The curator had shifted its territory, was hunting in a new section of forest, about 8 miles west of the previous zone. I put out new warnings, new signs, tried to redirect hiking traffic away from the area. 2 weeks later, a 23-year-old painter from Charlotte went missing, right in the middle of the new zone. Victim number 43. I went to the search efforts, helped look for her, knowing we'd never find her, knowing she was standing in a clearing somewhere, waiting, part of the collection. Her name was Sarah Chen. She'd come to the forest to paint landscapes. Her family showed me her work. She was talented, really talented. Of course she was. The curator only collected the best. I retired in 2018, 71 years old, 47 missing persons over my career. 47 people I couldn't save. But I didn't stop working. I live now in a cabin at the edge of the forest, the cabin that used to be the ranger station before they built the new one, and I maintain my map. Every time I hear about a missing person in the Appalachians, anywhere from Georgia to Maine, I plot it. Check if it fits the pattern: age, physical condition, personality, location. And the pattern is everywhere. The curator in my forest isn't unique. There are others, dozens of them maybe, hundreds, scattered throughout the Appalachian Mountains, each one with its own territory, its own collection, its own melody. I've been in contact with other retired rangers. Quietly, unofficially, we share information, compare maps, try to identify the territories of different curators. We've mapped at least 17 distinct territories along the Appalachian Range, 17 known curators. There are probably more. And they're patient, immortal, maybe. They've been collecting for centuries. The Cherokee knew about them. The people before the Cherokee probably knew about them too. Forests older than human civilization, with guardians who view us the way we view butterflies: beautiful, temporary, collectible. Last month, I heard the melody again. I'm 71 years old. I shouldn't fit the profile anymore. Too old, too broken down. Not what the curator wants. But I heard it anyway. Faint, very faint, like it was testing me, like it remembered me from 23 years ago and was curious if I'd follow this time. I didn't. But it scared me. Because if the curator is expanding its criteria, if it's starting to collect people outside the usual pattern, how many more are at risk? I'm telling you this because you need to know. If you hike in the Appalachian Mountains, you need to understand what's out there. It's not just bears and weather and rough terrain. There are curators, entities that collect people, beautiful people, creative people, people who can truly appreciate the forest. And they called you with a melody, the most beautiful sound you'll ever hear. So beautiful you'll follow it anywhere, into the deep woods, into the clearing, into the collection. If you hear that melody, and you'll know it when you do because nothing else sounds like it, you have two choices. Run immediately. Don't hesitate. Don't try to find the source. Just run until you're out of the forest. Or if you can't run, if the melody has you already, cause yourself pain, real pain, enough to shock your system, break the trance, then run. I drove a knife through my hand. I don't recommend that, but I'm alive because of it. 47 people I knew of didn't make it. They're still out there, standing in clearings, part of the curator's gallery. Alive but not living, waiting but not knowing what they're waiting for. Forever. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I can hear the melody from my cabin. Just at the edge of hearing. A whisper of impossible beauty calling from the trees. I don't go to it. Not anymore. But I listen. And I update my map. I've seen trees split by lightning 1,000 times in these Appalachian Mountains. 23 years as a ranger on the Blackburn Ridge Trail will teach you what nature can and cannot do. Wood splinters. It chars. It cracks along the grain, following the path of least resistance like water finding its way downhill. But wood doesn't burn in geometric patterns. It doesn't burn in dates, and it definitely doesn't burn your own name into the trunk. The hemlock stood where the trail forked toward Dead Woman's Hollow, a name the tourists think is quaint until they learned about Emily Chen. I found the tree on a routine patrol, 3 miles from the nearest campsite, the bark blackened in a way that made my throat close up. I'd been checking on illegal campers reported near the old fire tower, taking the long route through the hardwood forest where the maples were just starting to turn. October in the Appalachians is different than anywhere else. The mountains breathe differently this time of year, exhaling the summer's warmth in cold morning mists that cling to the valleys like something alive. The tourists come in droves for the fall colors, clogging the parking lots with their SUVs and their expensive hiking boots that have never seen a real trail. They take their photos, post them online, and leave without ever understanding that these mountains are older than their concept of time, that the Cherokee who lived here first had stories about the peaks and hollows that made even the bravest warriors walk carefully after dark. I'd been thinking about Emily Chen that morning. I always do when I pass the fork. Her face still looks out from missing posters in the ranger station, faded now, the paper yellowed with age, but her smile still bright. 8 years old, gap-toothed, holding a butterfly on her finger. They'd been camping, her and her parents, just a weekend trip to see the leaves. She'd wandered off while her father was setting up the tent, just vanished like the mountain had swallowed her whole. That was 30 years ago, almost to the day. The search had gone on for weeks, hundreds of volunteers combing every inch of Blackburn Ridge, dogs, helicopters, even psychics, desperate to help. They found her tent, abandoned, her parents' belongings untouched, but inside, Emily had done something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. She'd carved symbols everywhere, into the tent fabric with her fingernails until they'd torn and bled, into the sleeping bags, into the cooler, the camp stove, even into her own father's hiking boots. Geometric patterns that the investigators photographed and studied and could never explain. Sharp angles and spirals and shapes that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long, like optical illusions that your brain couldn't quite process. The last thing she'd carved in the dirt outside the tent was a date. 10/23/1994. The day after she disappeared. They never found her body. The case went cold. Her parents divorced 2 years later, destroyed by grief and unanswered questions. And the symbols in that tent became local legend, proof, some said, that something in these mountains was older and stranger than any of us wanted to admit. I'd joined the Ranger Service because of Emily Chen. 17 years old, watching the news coverage, seeing her mother's face crumble during yet another press conference where they had nothing new to report. I'd promised myself I'd learn these trails so well that no one would ever get lost on my watch again. 23 years later, I knew every mile of Blackburn Ridge, every switchback, every water source, every place where the trail got narrow and the drop-offs could kill you if you weren't careful. I knew where the black bears denned in winter and where the copperheads sunned themselves on the rocks in summer. I knew these mountains the way a sailor knows the sea, with respect, with caution, and with the absolute certainty that they could kill me anytime they wanted. But I'd never seen anything like the hemlock. The symbols covered 8 feet of trunk, maybe more. Precise, deliberate, burned into the bark with such heat that the wood beneath had crystallized, turning to something that looked more like black glass than charred timber. The patterns hurt to look at. Not physically, but in some deeper way, like staring at them too long would let something stare back. And there, among the spirals and angles that made my eyes water, Derek Holland, 11.17.2024. That's my name. Today's date. My hand moved to my radio automatically, 23 years of training taking over while my conscious mind was still trying to process what I was seeing. The radio crackled with static, though I was well within range of the nearest repeater. I keyed it twice. Nothing but that static. And underneath it, was that counting? A whispered rhythm like someone tallying numbers under their breath. I released the key. The forest had gone quiet in that way that makes your hindbrain scream, the way every animal knows means predator. No birds, no wind, no skittering of squirrels through dead leaves. Even the insects had stopped their chirping. Just my breathing, harsh and quick in the sudden silence, and the smell of old smoke that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. 3 bars of service, good coverage for this deep in the forest. I took photo after photo, making sure to capture every angle, every detail. The symbols seemed to move in my peripheral vision, but when I looked directly at them, they were still, just burned wood, just a pattern that shouldn't exist. I zoomed in on one section, and that's when I saw the smaller marks beneath my name. Numbers, coordinates, I realized, my pulse quickening. And beneath those, another date burned into the wood. 08.15.914. The day Emily Chen disappeared. The same geometric script, the same impossible precision. After 30 years, here it was again, and this time it had my name attached to it. I should have left. I should have marked the location, hiked back to the station, and brought in a team. That's protocol. That's what 23 years of experience demanded. But the symbols were warm. I know that sounds insane, but I had to check. I pulled off my glove and pressed my palm against the blackened bark, and the wood was warm like heated wax, like whatever had burned these marks had just finished its work. The heat spread up my arm, not painful but present, and for just a second I could have sworn I felt something. A pulse maybe, or a vibration too low to hear but deep enough to feel in my bones. I jerked my hand back. The symbols seemed darker now, deeper, as if my touch had made them more real somehow. The coordinates. I needed to check the coordinates. My hands were already pulling up the mapping app before my brain caught up. Fingers clumsy with adrenaline and something else. A compulsion I couldn't quite name, like the tree itself was urging me to understand, to see, to know. The coordinates pointed to a location off-trail, deep in a section we call the Narrows, a quarter-mile ravine where the ridge pinches tight and the canopy grows so dense that noon looks like dusk. It's not technically closed to hikers, but we don't encourage people to go there. The terrain is treacherous, all loose shale and drop-offs hidden by mountain laurel, and the GPS signal gets spotty where the ravine walls rise up on either side. I marked the location on my phone. 2 miles northeast of my current position, maybe an hour of bushwhacking through terrain that would tear up anyone who wasn't experienced. I knew I should call it in. I knew I should wait for backup. But the symbols were fresh, still warm under my palm, and if there was even a chance that Emily Chen could finally go home, that her parents could have closure after 30 years of not knowing, I started walking. The forest changed as I moved off trail. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. The tourist-friendly hardwoods gave way to older growth, massive hemlocks and white oaks that had been here since before the first Europeans arrived. The undergrowth grew thicker, mountain laurel forming walls of twisted branches that grabbed at my uniform and pack. I had to use my compass more than GPS. The signal kept cutting in and out, bars dropping away and coming back in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. The counting sound from the radio had stopped, but now I could hear it in the wind. Or maybe I was imagining it. Soft numbers, whispered in a voice that might have been a child's. 17, 18, 19. I pushed through a particularly dense thicket of laurel and stopped dead. The trees had marks on them. Not the geometric burns from the hemlock, but older scars. Crude tallies carved onto bark that had since tried to heal over them. Someone had carved a vertical line into an oak, deep enough that the tree had wept sap and scarred around it. Then another line beside it, and another. 5 tallies in a group, then a diagonal slash through them, then 5 more tallies starting fresh. Counting marks. I moved to the next tree. More tallies, and the next, and the next. They covered every tree within sight, stretching back into the forest in both directions like a trail of breadcrumbs. Or a warning. I took photos, my unease growing with each click of the camera. These marks were old, decades old, judging by how the bark had tried to heal. But they'd been made deliberately, methodically, by someone who'd spent hours out here marking every tree they could reach. What were they counting?
My GPS came back online long enough to show I was getting close to the coordinates. Another half mile. The terrain had started to slope downward, and I could hear water somewhere below. Probably Blackburn Creek, which ran through the bottom of the Narrows before disappearing into a cave system that cavers had spent years trying to fully map. The tallies grew more frequent. On some trees, the marks had been carved over multiple times, as if someone had returned again and again to update their work. I stopped at one oak where someone had carved so many tallies that they'd practically ringed the entire trunk. I tried to count them, got to 200, and gave up. 200 of what? The whispered counting was louder now. Definitely not my imagination. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, vibrating through the wood. 43, 44, 45. I keyed my radio again. Dispatch, this is Holland. Radio check? Static. Then, copy Holland. What's your 20? The dispatcher's voice sounded strange, distant. I gave her my approximate coordinates. Copy that. Everything okay out there? Yeah, just checking in. Going to be off trail for a bit longer. Found something that might be related to the Chen case. A pause. Long enough that I thought I'd lost the signal. Then, the Chen case? Derek, that was 30 years ago. I know, but there's something out here. Coordinates burned into a tree. I'm going to check it out. Another pause. You want backup? I looked at the marked trees, at the darkening forest ahead. Yeah, send someone to the dead woman's hollow fork. I'll mark a trail from there. Copy. I'll radio Pete. He's up near the fire tower, probably 45 minutes out. That's fine. Holland out. I clipped the radio back on my belt and kept moving. The slope grew steeper, the ground more treacherous. I had to use roots and saplings to keep from sliding on the loose leaf litter. The canopy had closed in overhead, turning afternoon into twilight, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. My breath misted in front of me. The counting had stopped. The forest was silent again, that predator silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then I saw the sinkhole.
It opened in the forest floor like a wound, maybe 20 feet across, its edges crumbling into darkness. The kind of geological feature that happens when underground streams erode the limestone beneath, creating voids that eventually collapse. The Appalachians are riddled with them, sinkholes and caves and underground rivers that connect in ways even the scientists don't fully understand. I approached carefully, testing each step before putting my weight down. The edges were unstable, held together by tree roots that had grown into a lattice trying to hold the ground together. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the opening. The light caught something 10 feet down, partially buried in leaf litter and soil that had collapsed into the hole. A small sneaker, pink, rotted, the laces still tied. My heart stopped. I zoomed in with my phone camera, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. There, barely visible beneath the shoe, a fragment of fabric, and further down, where the darkness swallowed the light, something pale that might have been bone. Oh, Emily. I backed away from the edge, fumbling for my radio. This time, I didn't care about the static or the strange sounds underneath. Dispatch, this is Holland. I need recovery at the Narrows. Possible remains related to the Chen case. I need the sheriff, medical examiner, and a technical rescue team. The static came back, and underneath the dispatcher's voice, I heard it again, that whispered counting, clearer now. 61, 62, 63. Copy that, Derek. Repeat, possible remains? Yes, child-sized clothing and possible bones. I'm marking the location now. Jesus. Okay, Sheriff's Department is notified. Teams en route. Estimated arrival 90 minutes. Can you secure the scene? 90 minutes alone in this place. I swept my flashlight across the ravine, and that's when I saw the oak tree. It clung to the sinkhole's edge like it was trying to hold the ground together, its roots exposed and wrapped around chunks of limestone like arthritic fingers. The trunk was massive, maybe 4 feet across, old enough to have been here when Emily Chen disappeared. And burned into that trunk, covering it from root to crown, were more symbols. I moved closer, my light revealing pattern after pattern of that same geometric script. But these were different, larger, more elaborate, and among them, carved into the wood with such precision they looked printed rather than burned. Laura Peterson, 03-22-2025. James Kim, 03-22-2025. Rachel Holland, 03-22-2025. Stephen Mitchell, 03-22-2025. Diana Flores, 03-22-2025. I counted 12 names total, all with the same date, March 22nd, 2025, tomorrow. And the third name down, the one that made my vision blur and my knees go weak, Rachel, my daughter, my only child. I grabbed the tree trunk for support, and the moment my hand touched the bark, the forest exhaled.
That's the only way I can describe it. A collective sigh from every tree, every branch, every root system connected through the soil. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, from autumn cool to winter cold. My breath came out in thick clouds. Frost spread across the exposed roots, crystallizing in patterns that matched the symbols on the trunk. And the oak tree's branches began to move. Not swaying in wind, moving, the limbs bent and twisted with purpose, interweaving with each other and with the branches of neighboring trees, creating a lattice that blocked my path back up the ravine. I watched, frozen in horror and disbelief as the forest rearranged itself. The whispered counting swelled to a chorus, coming from all around me. 87, 88, 89. I spun, looking for another root. Behind me, mountain laurel bushes shifted, their roots breaking through soil with wet tearing sounds. In the fading light, I could see the entire ravine responding, vegetation moving with the patience of something that had waited 30 years and could wait 30 more. But I couldn't. Laura Peterson was the elementary school principal in Blackburn Township. James Kim ran the fire department. Stephen Mitchell was the mayor. These weren't random names. These were the people who kept our small mountain community functioning. Their deaths would be devastating. And Rachel, God, Rachel. She'd called last week to tell me she'd be visiting for the first time in 2 years, driving up from Charlotte to spend the weekend.
We'd had a falling out after her mother died. Something stupid about the funeral arrangements that had spiraled into years of hurt feelings and stubborn silence. But she'd called. She'd wanted to reconnect. She was supposed to arrive tomorrow afternoon, March 22nd. The tree wasn't predicting tragedy. It was announcing it, counting down to it, and somehow, impossibly, it wanted me here to witness.
I ran, not up toward the trail. The branches had made that impossible, but parallel to the ravine, looking for any break in the vegetation, any path that would take me away from this place. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as I crashed through undergrowth, thorns tearing at my face and hands. Behind me, I could hear the forest moving. Not fast, but inevitable, like watching storm clouds roll in. The creaking of wood, the snap of roots, the whisper of leaves that sounded too much like words. Witness, witness, witness. A hemlock branch caught my shoulder, not swaying in my path, but actively reaching, grabbing. The impact spun me around and I went down hard, the flashlight spinning away into the leaves. In the sudden darkness, I heard it clearly, that whispered counting, but closer now, all around me, coming from the trees themselves. I crawled toward where I'd seen the light fall, hands scrabbling through dead leaves and loose soil. My fingers closed around the flashlight and I swung the beam up and froze. 10 feet away, carved into the ravine wall itself, was a single word in that same geometric script. The letters were 10 feet tall, cut so deep into the rock face that they probably went back several feet. This wasn't done recently. This had been here years, decades, maybe longer. Witness. My radio crackled to life, loud in the silence. "Holland, this is dispatch. Pete's about 20 minutes out from the Hollow Fork. You copy?" I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Copy. Tell him to bring cutting tools. The trail's blocked." "Blocked? By what?" "How can I explain? Fallen trees, storm damage. Just tell him to be careful." "Copy that. Derek, are you okay? You sound..." "I'm fine. Just get him here." Holland out. I wasn't fine. I was 3 miles from the nearest trail, watching a forest rearrange itself, staring at a word carved into stone that shouldn't exist, with my daughter's name burned on a tree trunk alongside a date that was tomorrow. The tree didn't want to hurt me. I understood that now with crystalline clarity. The oracle, that's what Emily Chen had called it in her drawings, the ones the investigators had found scattered around her tent. Crude pictures of a massive tree with symbols carved into its trunk, with a child standing before it, hands pressed to the bark. She titled the drawing, "The Oracle Shows What Will Be." They'd thought it was just a child's imagination, evidence of the confused mental state she must have been in before she wandered off and died. But Emily had seen this. She'd found the tree, or the tree had found her. It had shown her something, burned its visions into her mind the way it burned symbols into bark, and she tried to warn people the only way she knew how, carving frantically into every surface she could reach, trying to get the message out before... Before what? Before the tree took her? Before whatever was supposed to happen on October 23rd, 1994? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and searched news archives. October 23rd, 1994, Blackburn Township. The results loaded slowly. Then, I saw it. Near tragedy averted at Blackburn Elementary. A gas main rupture, detected the morning of October 23rd, just hours before school was supposed to start. The building evacuated, repairs made. If it had gone undetected, if the spark from any light switch or heating system had ignited the gas, Emily had saved them. An anonymous tip, the article said, had led inspectors to check the main. But Emily had disappeared on the 22nd. Unless she hadn't. Unless she'd made it out of these woods somehow, called in the warning, and then... I looked at the sinkhole and the small pink shoe. And then... she'd come back, because the oracle
demanded its witness. My mind raced through possibilities, each more impossible than the last. The oracle showed Emily what would happen, a gas explosion that would kill dozens of children. She tried to warn people with her carvings, but no one understood. So she'd escaped the forest, called in an anonymous tip that saved the school, and then the tree had called her back, pulled her back, because the bargain wasn't complete. The oracle didn't just want someone to see the future, it wanted someone to witness it, to be there when the knowledge bore fruit. And if you tried to change what it showed you, if you tried to save people, it wanted payment. My hand moved to the radio, then stopped. What would I say? That I'd found Emily Chen's body and also a magic tree that predicts the future and wants me to watch people die? They'd pull me off this mountain for psychological evaluation. But I had evidence, photos of the symbols, the names, the dates. I pulled up my phone's gallery, scrolling through the images I'd taken of the hemlock at the trail fork, of the oak tree beside the sinkhole. The photos were blank, not corrupted, blank. Just images of normal trees, bark unmarked, no symbols visible at all. I scrolled frantically through every picture. They'd all been replaced with ordinary forest shots, as if I'd been photographing nothing unusual at all. No, 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 no. I ran back to the oak tree, flashlight beam catching those burned names. I held up my phone and took another photo. Watched as the image appeared on screen, showing exactly what I was seeing, the symbols, the names, all of it. Then, as I watched, the names faded from the photo, like disappearing ink. Within seconds, I was looking at a picture of a normal tree trunk. The oracle didn't want evidence, it only wanted witnesses. I looked at the names burned into the oak tree. 12 people, good people. People who kept Blackburn Township running, who had families and dreams and years left to live. And Rachel, God, Rachel, who I'd barely spoken to in 2 years, who I'd let my grief and stubbornness drive away, who was coming tomorrow to give me a second chance I didn't deserve. March 22nd. Tomorrow. What was supposed to happen tomorrow? I pulled out my phone again, searching local news, event calendars, anything that might connect 12 specific people to a single date. The signal was weak but functional, pages loading in fits and starts. There, Blackburn Township Annual Spring Festival Planning Meeting, March 22nd, 7 p.m. at the Community Center. All town leadership required to attend. I scrolled through the planning committee. Laura Peterson, James Kim, Stephen Mitchell, all the names from the tree were on the list. The festival was a big deal for our little town, drew tourists from across the state. Everyone who was anyone in local government would be at that meeting. But why was Rachel's name there? She didn't live here anymore, hadn't for years. I called her number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Rachel, it's Dad. Listen, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to not come up tomorrow. I need you to stay in Charlotte. Something's not right. Just call me back, okay? Please. I hung up and immediately tried again. Voicemail again. I sent a text, then another, each message more desperate than the last. The forest had gone quiet again. The branches had stopped moving. In the distance, I could hear voices. The rescue team arriving, probably Pete and whoever else dispatch had called in. They'd follow my marked trail from the fork, be here in 20 minutes, maybe less. And then what? I'd show them Emily's remains, let them process the scene, and somehow convince them that there was going to be a tragedy tomorrow night at the community center? Based on what? Symbols I couldn't photograph on a tree that showed normal bark to everyone but me? The counting had started again, so soft I almost couldn't hear it. 137, 138, 139. I looked at the word carved into the ravine wall. Witness. That's what it wanted, what it always wanted. Not prevention, not salvation, just someone to see, to know, to carry the weight of unavoidable knowledge. But Emily changed things.
She'd saved those children despite what the Oracle wanted, and the Oracle had taken her in return. I pulled out my knife, a sturdy fixed blade I'd carried for 23 years, sharp enough to cut through rope or carve blazes into trees when I needed to mark a trail. The blade gleamed in the flashlight beam. I rolled up my sleeve and pressed the point against my forearm, and before I could think too hard about what I was doing, I carved no. The pain was immediate and shocking, blood welling up in the shallow cut. I kept going, carving faster now, rough letters that would scar. 03-22-2025, Community Center, gas leak. The forest shuddered. That's the only word for it. Every tree, every root, every branch shook simultaneously, and the temperature dropped so fast that the blood on my arm started to freeze before it could drip. My breath came in gasps that crystallized instantly. The whispered counting swelled to a roar, hundreds of voices, thousands, all counting in unison, numbers overlapping and echoing until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. 241, 242, 243. The oak tree's branches withdrew, slowly, reluctantly. The mountain laurel stopped shifting. The roots that had torn through the soil stayed still. And in the sudden silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood run colder than any supernatural forest could. Laughter. Not human laughter, not quite. Something older, stranger, coming from deep in the earth beneath the sinkhole. A sound like rocks grinding together, like water eroding stone, like time itself finding humor in the struggles of something as brief and fragile as a human life. Then it stopped. The forest was just a forest again, dark, cold, but normal. Above me, I could see flashlight beams cutting through the trees. Pete's voice called out, "Derek, are you down there?" "Yeah, I'm here, Pete. I found her. Emily Chen."
The next 6 hours blurred together. The rescue team descended into the ravine with proper safety equipment, established a perimeter, called in the sheriff's department and the medical examiner. They recovered what was left of Emily Chen carefully, reverently. 30 years of questions finally getting answers. I sat wrapped in an emergency blanket while a paramedic cleaned and bandaged the cuts on my arm. Pete asked me about them, and I lied, said I'd fallen, caught myself on a sharp rock. He gave me a look that said he didn't quite believe me, but wasn't going to push it right now. The medical examiner, Dr. Barbara Cohen, picked her way over to where I sat. She was in her 50s, had been doing this job longer than I'd been a ranger. Her face was professionally neutral, but I could see the tension around her eyes. "Derek," she said quietly, this is going to give a lot of people closure. Her parents deserve to know, to bury their daughter properly." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "The remains are consistent with a fall into the sinkhole. We'll need to do a full examination, but preliminarily it looks like she wandered off, fell in, and, well, we'll know more once we can examine her properly." "Yeah," the word came out rough. "That makes sense." It didn't, though. The pink shoe had been near the surface, placed carefully, not tumbled or disturbed. Emily hadn't fallen. She'd been placed there, or had gone willingly, after making her phone call to save those children at the school. But I couldn't say that. Couldn't explain that I knew the truth because a tree had shown me, with symbols that didn't appear in photographs. Dr. Cohen squeezed my shoulder and moved back to her team. Pete sat down beside me, his own face drawn with exhaustion. "Hell of a thing, finding her after all this time." "Yeah." "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at that. If only it were that simple. "Just tired. Long day." "You should head back. Let us finish processing the scene. Get some rest." I nodded, but I didn't move. Couldn't.
because 30 feet away, the oak tree stood beside the sinkhole, and I could still see the names burned into its bark, even though I knew no one else could. Tomorrow's date, 12 people. My daughter. "Pete," I said slowly, "the community center. You guys checked the gas lines recently?" "The community center? Why?" I thought I smelled something funny when I was up there last week. Might be worth having someone take a look before the planning meeting tomorrow." "The spring festival meeting? Derek, that's not until—" He stopped, looking at me more carefully. "You really think there's a gas leak?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but it wouldn't hurt to check, right? Better safe than sorry." Pete pulled out his phone, typed a quick message. "I'll have James swing by first thing in the morning. He's fire chief. He'll know what to look for." James Kim, whose name was on the tree, who would be at that meeting tomorrow night. "Make sure he checks tonight before the meeting, please." Something in my voice made Pete look at me hard. "Derek, what's going on?" "Just a feeling, a bad feeling. Humor me?" He studied me for another moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll call him myself, make sure it gets done tonight." He stood, brushing leaves off his pants. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Pete." He walked back toward the recovery team, already pulling out his phone. I sat in my emergency blanket, shivering despite the insulation, and stared at the oak tree. The names were still there, still burned into the bark with that impossible precision, but they seemed less vivid now, the letters not quite as dark, as if my interference had already started to change things. Or maybe the Oracle was just adjusting its plans. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat in my small ranger cabin with every light on, my bandaged arm throbbing, watching my phone for messages from Rachel that never came. I called her 6 more times, all voicemail, sent a dozen texts that went unanswered. At 6 a.m., my phone finally rang. "Pete." "Derek, you were right. James found a cracked main at the community center. Gas company's out there now. It's bad. If it had made it until tonight, with all those people in the building—" My hand tightened on the phone. "Is James okay?" "Yeah, he's fine. Shaken up, but fine. Said the leak was worse than anything he's seen in 20 years. One spark and the whole building would have gone up. You saved a lot of lives last night, Derek." I closed my eyes. "Good. That's good. How did you know? You didn't actually smell anything last week, did you?" "No, I didn't." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm not going to ask, but Derek, get some rest. You look like hell, and after yesterday, just take care of yourself, okay?" "Yeah, I will." I hung up and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking over Blackburn Ridge, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, the oak tree stood beside a sinkhole, and the hemlock still marked the fork toward Dead Woman's Hollow. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Dad? Sorry for not answering. Was in a work meeting that ran late and then lost signal. What's wrong? You okay?" I typed with shaking fingers. "I'm fine. Just wanted to hear your voice. You still coming up today?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Actually, about that, my car is making a weird noise, and I don't want to risk the mountain roads. Can we reschedule for next weekend?" I sat down heavily on the bed. She wasn't coming. She was safe. All of them were safe. James Kim had found the leak before the meeting, before anyone could get hurt. I'd changed it, carved a warning into my own flesh, and changed what the Oracle had shown me. Another text appeared. "Dad, you there?" "Yeah, next weekend sounds great. I love you." "Love you too. Get some rest. Pete told me about you finding Emily Chen. That must have been really hard." "It was, but her parents can finally have closure. That matters." It does. I'm proud of you. See you next weekend. I set the phone down and rolled up my sleeve. The bandage was spotted with blood, the cuts underneath throbbing. I carefully peeled it back. The letters I'd carved were healing wrong. The shallow cuts were already scabbing over, but the scabs were dark, like burned wood, and the letters seemed deeper than they should be, as if something was carving them from the inside. I rewrapped the bandage quickly, hands trembling. The oracle wasn't finished with me. I had saved them, yes, changed what the oracle had shown me, just like Emily had changed the future 30 years ago. But Emily paid a price for her interference, and now the forest knew I would do it again.